So as this conference has evolved, we've been trying to figure out how to have keynote speakers that are amazing, and Linda set a very high bar last year. And so one of the things that we looked for were who's out there that's doing really interesting things that can help us challenge what we're doing on our campuses and bring some new ideas. And so this year we are privileged to have Michael Wesch with us, who also came far from Kansas. And Wesch has won several major awards for his work, and as well as several major teaching awards. And it is my pleasure to introduce you to Michael Wesch. Say one more thing. So in traditional EduSoCal culture, we want to have a conversation with Mike. So we're going to let him set the stage with a great presentation, and then I'm going to come up here and actually ask him some questions, and we want you to come up with some questions as well. So you can tweet them directly to EduSoCal, and I will see those questions, and we'll be able to ask those questions. Or if you are Twitter adverse, which I know there are a few of you, I'll give you an opportunity to actually raise your hand and ask your questions too. So as he's going, know that there is going to be some time for us to have a conversation with Mike. Okay? Thanks.
All right, thanks. So I wanted to start, I've been thinking a lot about computers in education and thinking about the internet in education, that kind of thing. So I was reading Seymour Papert. Did you guys read Seymour Papert? A lot of you, maybe? Yeah, so Seymour Papert is kind of a great grandfather in this area, and he tells a story about this moment just before the internet existed, in which he was working with some 4-year-olds at a preschool, and they all wanted to know how giraffes sleep, and nobody knew how giraffes sleep, and he didn't know how giraffes slept either, and so they just started spouting out all these wonderful theories, and then he went home later that day, and he was able to pull out all these encyclopedias he had and was combing through them, and he actually still couldn't figure out how giraffes slept. But as he was doing this, he had this realization. He realized that someday, even these little kids would be able to access this thing that he called the knowledge machine, and it would give them access to just, almost unimaginable resources of videos and photos and all kinds of things, so they themselves could actually see how giraffes sleep. So, here we are 20 years later, and of course we know that he's right. I mean, the knowledge machine is very much here. And if, I was in the middle of Illinois when I first thought of this, and I was driving along, I thought, well, let's just, test this out. So I'm in rural Illinois, and I decided to search for giraffes sleeping. And I got 56,000 videos on YouTube about giraffes. And then if that isn't good enough, then you can go to Google Scholar, and you can get these really sophisticated articles about how giraffes sleep. And this one here mentions how they have this paradoxical sleep cycle. Very interesting stuff. And then if you don't understand this article, because it says here that they sleep with their head on their croup. I didn't know what a croup was. But then if you go to Google Images, you can look it up, and of course you get images like this, and then you figure it out. Like, that's what a croup is. So this is the knowledge machine. And this knowledge machine is actually coexistent with this other great knowledge machine of our age, so that there are these two great knowledge machines. This is the other knowledge machine. This is my classroom. And it's just one part of a larger knowledge machine. But these two knowledge machines are now colliding. They're coming together. And it should be this amazing moment where these two great knowledge machines can play off of each other and create something better than the sum of its parts. But in fact, what happens is one knowledge machine enters the other knowledge machine as a distraction device. And this is the core problem in my mind. When I look at my classroom, when I see this great knowledge machine coming in as a distraction device, that strikes me as a very big problem. So when you look at what Seymour Papert, his vision was, he mentioned that nothing could be more absurd than an experiment in which computers are placed in a classroom in which nothing else has changed. He says computers serve best when they allow everything to change. And essentially what's happened is we've not changed anything, and so when this other knowledge machine comes in, it comes in as this distraction device. So we're really just at the beginning of this. We all know that if you were to look, say, 5 years ahead, we all know the trend line where we're headed. The world may look like this now, but we're really headed towards ubiquitous computing, ubiquitous communication, ubiquitous information, unlimited speed about everything, everywhere, from anywhere, on all kinds of devices. Right? So that's that's the quick summary. And that has all kinds of implications for education as we know it. We know that textbooks are still, I mean, they're struggling, they're still there, but there's all kinds of free options emerging. There's free courses emerging. There are MOOCs emerging, which you guys will talk about later. So there's all these, basically, this freeing of information, and it's coming up everywhere. So they have these free courses like on Udacity, for example, and you might look at one of these courses and you can see here, you know, it says Intro to Computer Science, and you got this guy teaching it, and you think, well, who's that guy? Well, it turns out that guy is a very illustrious professor of computer science at the University of Virginia. He wins major awards for his teaching. So these are not bad teachers out there. This is actually really good material. Clayton Christensen has this interesting story about this where in his studies of disruptive innovation, he always thought that disruptive innovations might happen in technology or in other areas of business, but they wouldn't happen to education because education was unique and different. And then he got an offer from University of Phoenix to teach a class for them. And at first he was like, are you kidding? I'm at Harvard. You know, why would I, you know, soil my name? and they said, well, you would reach 150,000 people. And he thought, well, my mission in life is to teach. And so I should do this. So he decides he's going to do it. He goes to his dean at Harvard, and they, of course, say, you're not going to soil our name with that. So they made University of Phoenix do it off campus. They bought this nice space just off the harbor there in Boston, overlooking the water, this beautiful space. And Clayton walks in, and he looks out in the audience. Here's all the University of Phoenix students, and he is just mesmerized at how beautiful they are. They're just like the most beautiful people he's ever seen. So he asked them, like, are you guys all students here? And they say, oh no, we're actors. And it turns out they'd all been like paid to be there and to look interested. When they actually cut this thing together, you know, they put all these wonderful graphics behind him, and every time he got a little boring, they would pan out to these beautiful people looking very engaged. And he was just mesmerized by himself. He was like, wow, Clayton, this is good stuff, you know, like. And so Clayton became very interested in online education, especially when he asked them, he said, you know, this is really good. And they said, well, we actually spend $200 million a year improving education. And he thought back to the Harvard budget for improving teaching, and he thought we might be in trouble here. So really what's happening, this is the scene there at Boston. When you compare what Clayton Christensen saw at University of Phoenix to this experience, which is a pretty typical experience at a large state university for a lot of students, you know, they beat us. They beat this experience when it's just in terms of delivering information. But of course, it's not just about delivering information, but then you look at something like the Khan Academy, which is also not just about delivering information, but also about assessment. And it's not just the videos and the amount of videos that they have. I mean, they have thousands of videos on all kinds of different topics. But it is the fact that you move through this structure using a form of mastery learning, right, where you're taking these questions and moving through the process as you go. But what's really interesting on the back end of this is that Khan Academy has tons and tons of data, not just on one person, but on hundreds of thousands of people. And the real interesting thing about Khan Academy and a lot of these other places that are doing online education is what they might do with this big data and what they're already doing with big data. Not only do they have numerous ways to parse it and look at it, but they have numerous ways of actually leveraging that data. Because what happens when you have all this data and you have a lot of money, you're throwing $200 million a year, for example, and you have lots of big data, you get really interesting outcomes. For example, if you look at what Target does with big data and lots of money, there's a story you guys might have heard about this guy who walks into the Minnesota store and he's really upset and he's carrying this flyer with him from Target. And the flyer has all these, it's to his 15-year-old daughter, and it's advertising all these things for pregnancy, right, for children and for getting through pregnancy. And he's just furious, and he says, why did you send this to my 15-year-old daughter? How could you do this? And they're just really apologetic. They're very sorry, this kind of thing. And then 2 days later, he calls back, and he's apologizing, and he says, yeah, it turns out there were things happening in my house I didn't realize. And Target actually knew that his daughter was pregnant before he did. And they knew this not because she went and bought, you know, prenatal vitamins or something really obvious, but it was because they know through correlational studies and this big data that if somebody were to go in and buy something like unscented lotion and some new towels, they have like a 70% chance of being pregnant. They have these really amazing correlational data points coming from this big data. And the same thing is happening now with online education. When you have lots and lots of people taking a course, you can identify sticking points. You can identify places where people have a conceptual challenge to overcome. And it turns out that thousands of people in a course of hundreds of thousands of people might have that same problem. And so you can adapt to that. So you might have seen the TED Talk from Daphne Kohler, who's at Coursera, where she talks about this. And she points out that through these types of identifications, along with leveraging these huge amounts of people working together, bringing all these students together into forums and so on, they can actually move towards this ideal where you have individual tutoring, which is much more effective than lecture or even mastery learning. Right now, they're sort of at the phase of mastery learning, and they'd like to get to individual tutoring. One of the products that emerges from this is Newton, which you might have heard of, which actually provides adaptive learning. Adaptive learning is something you'll hear a lot about in the near future. And this is just basically providing customized pathways for each individual student to find their way through a course based on their learning habits and learning styles and their conceptual challenges and so on. So that's already in place in something like My Math Lab. So that's basically a vision of education today and where things are going with technology and that kind of thing. But what's interesting is that Seymour Papert is not impressed. So we go back to that vision, this idea of the knowledge machine and how it could change everything. And Seymour Papert sees this as, in many ways, just a manifestation of this ongoing thing that started in the 60s, where he started arguing with this guy, Patrick Suppies, over whether or not learning was all about construction, where you actually construct knowledge, and you come with certain ideas, and then you have to develop new ideas from those ideas, and it's very project-based and so on, versus instruction. And what Seymour Papert would say is, when you look at these new technologies from Khan Academy, Coursera, and so on, there's a lot of instruction happening. It's very much based on this model here, and it will, and actually does, do a better job of delivering information and assessing the retrieval of information than this can do. But it doesn't go the next step towards towards deep learning, which is what I'd really like to talk about today. So when I was in this classroom here, I came to this sort of, it's kind of like a dark night of the soul kind of moment. And what happened was, I realized when I reflected on my own learning, what really changed my life was this moment when I started living my life based on these deep questions that were burning in my soul. I was suddenly really, really passionate about learning itself, not just to get a grade, but there were just questions that were burning in my soul that I needed answers to, and it took me on this lifelong journey of learning. And so I paused one day in my class about midway through the semester, and I just started listening for the questions they were asking. I wondered if they were asking the types of questions that would lead them on a lifelong journey of learning. And I was disappointed to find that the questions were things like, how many points is this worth? How long does this paper need to be? What do we need to know for this test? This was, and actually it's interesting, there's some interesting blog posts I can point you to some, where they talk about Khan Academy. Now Khan Academy is actually eliciting these same kinds of questions. Not really the deep questions, but these types of questions. And this actually makes a really big difference in the lives of our students, because there's a fundamental shift that happens when you stop asking questions like these and you start asking really deep questions. The difference is you go from being a superficial learner to a deep learner, and the really big difference is, as a deep learner, you develop what's called an adaptive expertise, rather than in a superficial learning, you develop procedural expertise. You definitely become an expert. You can become an expert through superficial learning. You can go through drills and you can learn all these procedures, but ultimately you're only going to be good at routines. You're going to be good at problems that people have already defined for you. You're not going to be able to handle new problems. You're not going to be able to handle new situations, and you're not going to be able to adapt to changing circumstances. So what we really need for our students is this kind of adaptive expertise that's only going to come through deep learning. And to me, the question is really the heart of this, which is why I'm so disappointed that these were the questions from my students. If you think about what a question is, I'm going to pull out my anthropologist hat now. If you think about how the questions and the importance of questions in the great timeline of human history, you would have to say that questions are probably the most important thing that humans do. For starters, there's this wonderful thing about questions in which, oh, no, it's fine. I blanked it. I just blanked it so I could be thoughtful about. All right. I'm trying to go deep into human history right now, so. Yeah. So if we go back, like say, well, let me start with this. Like if you think about, my own experience with questions has been that they take me, a way to think about it is that they take you on a quest. They literally do that. A great question always opens itself up to another question. And so once you have a really deep question, you just can't stop asking questions. And the question is really the beginning point of any real learning experience. The second thing about questions is that they connect us. It's like this amazing thing that humans do, that we can come to the edge of our thought and then pose a question, and then that invites other people to think with us. And of course, around the world, the most common greeting are questions. How did you sleep? How are you doing? These are all things that open up a conversation. So questions are amazing in that regard as well. And then the third thing is the way in which they signal our embrace of vulnerability. It's really hard to ask a question. You kind of have to make yourself small. And in fact, it's coded in the way that we ask questions itself, so that when you look at evolutionary history, for example, you see that most mammals and many birds will have a signaling system in which they raise their pitch if they want to express vulnerability, if they want to express a need to connect, that kind of thing. And if they want somebody to back off, they lower their pitch. So a dog is a really good example. A dog will growl to tell you to back off, and it'll kind of do a if it wants you to come closer. And when we ask questions in all languages around the world except for 70 in Africa, which there may be some historical reasons for the difference there. But the other 6,000 languages, including most African languages, all have this raised intonation when you ask a question. And that tells me it's kind of tapping into that signaling mechanism of making ourselves small, expressing our vulnerability, and inviting other people in. I think that's just has to be the most amazing thing humans do. And yet, in our schools, we don't encourage question asking at all in many ways. In fact, our schools are very much designed around information dumping and retrieval and regurgitation. So just to give you a sense of the importance of questions, let me show you one example. This is my own journey. I left Kansas State. I went to Kansas State as an undergrad myself and had all these questions burning in my soul after this class, and decided the only way to answer these questions was to go to New Guinea. I had all the particular questions burning in my soul were things about the grand scheme of human history, who we are, how different can we be, those types of things. So I decided to go to a place as different as possible from the world that I grew up in. And so I came to New Guinea, and you come into the capital city here, and this is a picture from my hotel that I took. It turns out this is the only picture I took from the hotel, because I grabbed my bag that day and I decided I was going to walk around the town. I was going to meet as many people as possible, just open up to the world and get to know the world. And I come out with my bag that morning, and there's these two guys walking towards me, and they say, "Hey, Mone." And in New Guinea, they speak like a pidgin English. So, "Hey, Mone" could mean good morning, or it could mean give me your money. And I assume they're saying good morning, and because I see the whole world through rose-colored glasses, I guess, And so I say, "Oh, morning, morning," and they say, "No, God, morning, morning." So now I know what they're trying to do, but I decide to sort of play it cool and just, or play it dumb, I guess, and just say, "Oh, morning, morning," and I try to slide past them, and they say, "No, God, morning, morning," and they tap their pockets and step in front of me, and then one guy pulls his jacket back, and he has this big machete in there, and he pulls this out, and as he does that, I turn my back to him, so that if he slashes at me, he'll hit my backpack, and I just start running. And I get around this corner, and fortunately, around the corner were all the wonderful people I thought I would meet in New Guinea, and they chase these two guys off. and I walk straight to the airport. And and then and then I get to the airport, and I'm looking up at the board, and the first thing on the board is Brisbane in Australia, and I think, well, that would be a great summer. That would be a great way to spend a summer. And then there's all these other things down the list, which are small places throughout New Guinea. And I realized as I was looking at the board that while Brisbane would be a great place to go, the answers to my questions were not in Brisbane. They were somewhere down the list. And that was the first moment I realized how powerful a question could be. I realized that these questions that I had were going to take me places that normally I would never dare go. So here I was getting on a plane and going to the center of the island, and I came into these villages like this. This is now several weeks later, because I just keep taking small plane after small plane, trying to go as far away as possible to get to someplace as different as possible. And I land here, and this is a place where a plane comes only once every 6 weeks or so. So the plane leaves, and I'm back here again. And then I decide I'm just going to keep going. And so I walk, and I just keep going past villages like this until I'm in a place that's just so radically different. There's no running water. There's no electricity. There's no internet access. There's creatures like this on the road, which apparently you're not supposed to get this close to them, but I didn't know that. And then I come to this village here, and this is where I ended up staying off and on for the next 8 years. So this became like my second home. This is the house I stayed in here. You can see just a quick tour. They grow their own taro, sweet potato, bananas. They raise pigs. They eat spiders. They eat snakes. Snakes are kind of a good deal. It's kind of like a 2-for-1 thing. You can cut open the snake, and you get what it just ate. So, and this was found just a week after I arrived. These are actually my legs here. And you can see my sleeping bag. I used to wrap myself up in that sleeping bag, and I call it my little America or my little Nebraska, because I'm from Nebraska. And I would just seal myself up. But then it's the tropics, so it'd get really hot, and in the middle of the night, the sleeping bag would come off of me, and I'd have to wipe all the bugs off. And this night, after we ate the snake, I'm thinking, my snake karma is not good. That snake might have family. So I'm really nervous, and I wrap myself up really tight. But in the middle of the night, the sleeping bag comes off of me, and I wake up in the middle of the night, and I can feel this thing laying across my chest. It's like this big around. And I managed to get it. I grab it with my left hand, and I throw it off of me. But as I threw it, I rolled with it. So I know I'm wrapped up with this thing somehow. And I managed to then pin it down with my left hand. And I'm trying to free my right arm so I can pin it down with 2 hands, but I can't move my right arm. And it's at this point I realize I've actually pinned down my own right arm like this. And my arm had just fallen asleep and was across me like this. So there was no snake. And this is like the beginning of a really dark period in my life, actually. I mean, it sounds really funny, but there's a number of stories I could tell you that are actually behind them. You start to realize, like, oh my gosh, this must have been the saddest time in your life. And it was. And it went on for about 8 months. And I realized later that what had happened was that I thought that when I went there, I thought that who I was something inside of me that I projected outward. And what happened when I was there is I realized that who we are is actually reflected back to us by the people around us. And the people around you don't know who you are, what you're doing. You suddenly start to ask those same questions. And so I had this complete kind of loss of self. But also, through that moment, I kind of opened myself up to people in the world around me in a way I'd never been open before. And I think I discovered, again, back on this idea of questions, I think what I discovered there was this capacity for wonder that I'd never had before, like this capacity to open up to other people, this capacity to not just ask a question, but to live with questions. And that became a really beautiful experience for me, and one that I wanted to share with more people, right? And that became like kind of what I want to do as a teacher, is I want to help people discover this sense of wonder, this capacity for sitting with questions, for sitting with ambiguity, and that's the amazing learning that can happen when you're in that type of situation. So compare that then to this. This is a valedictorian in Georgia, and this was from her speech. This is her valedictorian speech. She says, this is Erica Goldson. She says, "I wonder, why did I even want this position? Sure, I earned it, but what will come of it? When I leave educational institutionalism, will I be successful or forever lost? I have no clue about what I want to do with my life. I have no interest because I saw every subject of study as work, and I excelled at every subject just for the purpose of excelling, not learning. and quite frankly, now I'm scared. And that's your winner, right? Like that's the person who succeeded in the education system. So that's very disheartening. And then, once she graduates, she comes to this classroom, right? This is my classroom. And this is just a video I made a few years ago asking if these walls could talk, what would they say? So kind of asking this classic John Dewey question of, if students learn what they do, what are they learning when they're sitting here? And of course, one of the things they're learning is that the information is up at the front of the room, that they should ultimately just follow along. And so no matter what I'm saying at the front of the room, about being your own person and opening yourself up to wonder, asking questions and all those types of things, if it's not being modeled in the room, then that's not really happening. So here we just invited 200 students in to write the script for this video that you see here. And it starts with just asking them what's it like being a student today, and then they add their own ideas here. And some of them, you can see some blank spaces going on there. Those are places where we had to survey ourselves, so that we just turned the survey onto the students themselves and had some of these statistics come out. So this is typical for a large state institution. Your first 2 years, 18% of your teachers know your name, this kind of thing. So you can see this whole video up on YouTube if you're interested. I won't play the whole thing here, but you get the idea. And this, of course, was the video which produced these messages here that you saw earlier. There's also some other ones, not just about technology, but also things like they're only completing 49% of the readings assigned to them, and they find only 26% relevant to their life, which is like a 74% failure rate on our part. They buy $100 textbooks they never open. They pay for class, but they don't show up. So to me, this is a fundamental problem that's not addressed in any sort of online education scheme. This is the big challenge of mass education. And there's other challenges too. Even if you have everybody engaged, then you have this other issue, which is how that knowledge connects to the world around them. So this is David Hestings at Arizona State, and he realized he had this interesting event where all of his students were getting 80% in his physics class, on average. The average was always 80%. So things are going fine. But then he had a new colleague come in, and his new colleague had this new exam, a different kind of exam that actually didn't have formulas involved in it. It was just all about physics concepts. And his students who had finished the course with an 80% on average suddenly averaged 40%. And he thought, boy, that's really terrible. What happened here? And he looks at the exam and he realizes that it's because it doesn't have these formulas. The students can't apply their procedural knowledge. They can't apply this sort of routine expertise that they've developed. They need something else. They need conceptual knowledge, and they're not getting it right. So this one here, for example, is 2 metal balls are the same size, but one weighs twice as much as the other. The balls are dropped from the roof of a 2-story building at the same instant, and the time it takes to reach the ground will be, and so on. So you're supposed to just test basic physics knowledge here. Eric Mazur saw this, and he thought, well, he's over at Harvard, and he thought, well, that might be true at Arizona, but I'm at Harvard. And it turns out that in his case, it was exactly the same. Even his Harvard students were doing very poorly on an exam like this, which is to say, these students were learning how to take physics classes. They weren't learning physics. And there's this kind of disconnect that you see everywhere, right? So here's my university here, and then I notice when I'm on campus that there's this other place that people talk about. It's called the real world, and it's somewhere over there. And, and that strikes me as odd. And then when you're on campus, you have these places here like the different buildings. There's art, science, music, history, engineering, architecture, anthropology. And the message of all these different buildings and disciplines is that anthropology is not engineering, which is not history, which is not architecture, which is not art, and so on. But every great question that I've ever posed in my own mind transcends all these disciplines in some ways, has me bouncing around all over the library and all over campus to find the people who can help me with the answers. Not to mention it takes a good deal of play, but play is out over here, and the real world's somewhere over there. And so then you're back here in our classroom, and the worst part of this, of course, is that the number one sort of name of the game for the students is how to do well on this exam. And of course, this exam just is all about superficial learning in general. Like any kind of multiple choice Scantron exam is mostly going to be about gaming the system, trying to find a way to get by. In fact, the students talk about it in terms of getting by, which is kind of an interesting phrase in itself. So back to that moment then of crisis for me, when I realized that my students were not asking the types of questions that would take them on a journey of lifelong learning, I decided that the primary function of the class should be to inspire those questions. And I started realizing that the lectures I was giving were completely irrelevant if I looked 5 years down the line. If I were to think about the information I was transferring in say, an hour-long lecture, I realized that none of it mattered 5 years from now, whether or not the students could regurgitate any fact from any of that. And I thought, so what is the real reason for this lecture? And I started realizing that the real reason was to inspire these questions, but maybe there'd be a better way. Like if you start to realize that the real issue is the question itself, how could you do it differently? And so I started trying to get students to think about certain things. I would try all kinds of ways to get them to think about what it means that 1.3 billion people are living on less than $1 a day, or 3 billion on less than $2 a day, 800 million people are undernourished, and over 27,000 children will die of poverty today. And the main question I wanted them to ask was why? How does that happen? And to do this, I threw out everything about what you think about teaching in general. I thought, how could we do this? Let's just start from scratch. If I wanted to inspire this question, how would I do that? And I realized that it's probably not through lecture. There'd be maybe a little lecture, but mostly sort of inspirational TED Talk style stuff, right? Just really powerful, hit you hard kind of things. And then beyond that, though, we tried to do something else. And what we did was we opened up a Google Doc and we decided to try to simulate world history, try to answer that question, why? So what we did was the students started breaking up into groups, and we had to think about the global economy, war, diplomacy, politics, all these different aspects of world history, and try to create a super game that could simulate all of that. And we've been doing this now for 8 years. I'll show you what this looks like. This is going to look kind of crazy. This is a short video showing what this looks like. So the students are broken up into these groups, and they're put all over campus. And then in each group, one group gets marshmallows, another group gets straws, another group gets rubber bands. And then to survive, they have to trade these things so that they can shoot marshmallow-tipped straws over a creek. I know it sounds crazy.
We're a self-sufficient country.
Okay, but then there's these other groups.
Oh my goodness, this is so scary.
And they have PVC pipe, and they can blow marshmallows at people to kill them or freeze them. And people can protect themselves too with their marshmallow-tipped straw arrows. So this is essentially meant to simulate colonization, right? And the students actually help design this game, right? So they're always thinking about different parameters. Why is it that Africa was providing slaves to Europeans and not the other way around? Why is it that the Americas become settled by Europeans and not the other way around? These are the big questions that have to be asked.
We're keeping the bracelet for ourselves.
We could just shoot you. You have nothing.
So what's happening here is that the students who get colonized actually have to produce these necklaces for the colonizer, and these marshmallow necklaces, which requires the same things like straws and marshmallows and rubber bands. So you can see the resources are dwindling, and at this point there's no straws left anywhere.
What's that? You guys want to go with him? You're desperate? You need a job? What happened here?
So who wants to come with me?
They were paid something?
They paid us marshmallows to have part of our contract.
Oh, okay.
Slave trade essentially going across right now. But these people have actually been bought, and they're coming over to work.
Oh goodness, there's more. Oh my gosh, look at this. Green lit and attacked red at home. Blue did too. Oh, the troops are gathering. shut down. The world is coming to an end. There are no resources left.
So that takes like 4 weeks to plan. I mean, it's amazing. The best part about this is that it's all focused on this big question of like, how did the world end up the way that it is? And then we do this thing, and it's a lot of fun. The students love doing it, and it only takes a day. And then the next 3 weeks are just so rich with discussion based on what happened. We're trying to compare it to real-world history. We're asking big questions about, well, why did this happen in the simulation, and why did this happen in real-world history? They're really focusing on that big question. And a lot of them have come to empathize with other parts of the world that they never had really even considered before, because they, in a sense, had role-played those different areas of the world. And they had to go do research and do all this deep thought about how these places ended up the way that they are today. We also have Twitter running in the background during all this, so it's people can kind of keep up with what's happening around the simulation through Twitter. We're also starting to develop other things, like we're going to use like Google motion graphics to keep track of the different countries as the simulation continues. So there's a lot of exciting things to do in the future. But the best part is that the students are no longer asking, what do we need to know for this test? They're asking, what do we need to know for this test, the test of our lives? And that's like the real core of this. So what's happening, the other thing you see there is that the students are really getting to know each other. They really like, there's a lot of bonding that happens through this process. And it transfers this model from, the Parker Palmer points out this old model of the object of knowledge being passed through the expert to the amateurs, and it changes things so that there's now like this living subject. And the living subject is this ongoing question that nobody really knows the answer to, which is why the world is the way it is. And they all are becoming knowers. They know something about the answer to that question, but not anybody could know the ultimate answer, so they're all sharing answers together. This is kind of what Eric Mazur discovered when he tried to redo his physics class, and he realized that they were learning how to take a physics class and not real physics. Is he started posing really interesting questions to them, having them answer on clickers, and then he would get these bimodal distributions where half the class would think the answer is one thing and the other half would think the other thing, and he would then turn them on each other to convince the other group which one is right. And ultimately one group the people who knew the right answer would be able to convince the people who didn't know the right answer. And the students, the learning went way up in terms of what they were actually able to perform on these exams. Their conceptual knowledge was improving. Through studies like this, and there's been a lot of evidence now that this form of active learning and teaching one another is so effective that places like, this is the Intro to Biology at Minnesota, they've completely revamped, they've changed the way that their classrooms are built. MIT is starting to do the same thing. So instead of these big lecture halls, they're starting to build rooms like this where people come in and they start collaborating with one another. This capacity to connect with each other can actually extend into the community as well. So this is a project we did with a very big group of students. This is 200 students in landscape architecture at Kansas State. And what we did was we just canceled classes for 2 days, and we sent them all over town to do real work in real places, applying what they've been learning in their classes. And so what they did was they used OpenStreetMaps to map our town. So OpenStreetMaps is a lot like Wikipedia. There's a big edit button, and you can drag and drop things and add things. And what they did was they mapped the town based on its bikeability. So they added bike parking everywhere that there's bike parking. They added data on the speed of traffic and the volume of traffic. And then we're able to create this map where the reds are places where it's very dangerous to bike, the greens are very safe to bike, and so on. And as you zoom out on this, what you see is that the town is divided by this red grid. So if you want to bike anywhere, it's very difficult because you have to cross these very dangerous places where it's red. So then they that took them 24 hours to make this map. They spent the next 24 hours designing solutions to those problems in the network. And then they invited, we had the city commission, the mayor, and the bike advisory committee come in and look at their results at the end of this. And as a result, we actually not only got a lot of press, but ultimately revamped the entire bicycle master plan for the city, so that the city today, just 3 years after this, is now has bicycle boulevards and is a bicycle-friendly community, something that people never thought possible. And this is something that was done in 48 hours just by students, bringing 200 students together, leveraging technology to do something good for the community. So then you go to a smaller class, and this is where you can really get into some really deep possibilities. So this is a small group of students. This is a research methods class, which for some reason a lot of people really dislike teaching research methods, but to me it's like the perfect opportunity to do some really interesting projects together. So what we do in this class is, you can see instead of a syllabus, we just change all the assumptions about what you think about a class. It's not about me delivering information to the students, it's about us doing something amazing together. And so we set a research schedule, and we used to put this up on a wiki, and anybody could edit this, and what would happen is all these students would add readings for each other, because they really want to do well on this project. And just to give you some sense of what we're doing, basically each year we decide we're going to go to Sundance, and then we're going to make a great documentary that goes to Sundance. What the topic of that documentary is, we don't know yet. That's the goal. We're just going to go to Sundance with a documentary. It's a digital research methods class, and so that becomes the goal. And everybody wants to do this, so the first thing you do is you sit down and you try to figure out, well, what are people's passions? What do people know a lot about? What could we do a documentary about? And then you start developing a research schedule around this. So the research schedule actually gets really, really big, and it's almost unmanageable. So what we do is in order to manage all the readings we have, we do one thing where we take something like Google Docs. This is Etherpad. When we first started, Google Docs didn't exist. So we used Etherpad. And what we would do is go to the library. The students would just read everything they could about the topic we were studying, summarize everything they were reading. And a week later, we would often have, say, 100 articles and books summarized by these 10 or 15 students. So instead of everybody coming back after the first week and they've all read some introductory reading, we now have basically covered the whole literature, and some student in the class is kind of an expert on that different piece because they're the ones who read it and summarized it. It creates a very rich discussion that's very different than any other type of class I've been in. And then because this kind of gets out of hand, and you just have this long, long list of readings, some students actually started making their own syllabi, and you can see it here. This is a couple years ago, and here she is making her own syllabus. This is unsolicited. She just did this on her own, and you can see she's made a 5-week syllabus in which she's assigned herself 4 books in 5 weeks, which, like, you know what happens when I assign 4 books in 5 weeks? And then other students were doing the same thing. So all these students are starting up their own blogs and making their own syllabi, 4 books in 5 weeks, 4 books in 5 weeks, and so on. So we've had a lot of success. We've never made it to Sundance, but we have had some success. We've had stuff reviewed in the New York Times and things like that. But what's really great about it is what happens to the students. They have this transformational experience very often. You can see here, she says, this is a day I couldn't be in class because we had a family emergency. And she says, it was one of the sweetest class periods I think I've ever been a part of. No teacher. She says, crazy, right? It was actually really sweet. We had the whiteboards covered with spiderweb diagrams, lists, and connections to the ideas we were all posing, and so on. But what I really liked is this last part. She says, we're always being shaped, always learning. What is learning? I'm learning right now, processing, learning how to communicate my thoughts, typing speed increasing. She goes on, and I've interviewed her since this, and she said this was like this major moment in her life where she learned to learn. Like it wasn't just about getting the grade anymore. It was about something much more than that. So this year, we decided to push the envelope a little bit. And so this is the group of students that came in this year. And we decided, I worked with a local retirement community that's like a continuing care retirement community. And basically, it's a retirement community that moves to a nursing home and then so on. And the students, we actually got a room, and the students got to move in. And so the students moved into this place. And I'll give you a sense of what this looks like and the type of learning that happens in this environment here. This is us moving in here. And we just use any technology we can. We're very technology agnostic, basically. We just have this great project. We're working together, and the technology flows from that. This time we're using this OneNote just allowed us to keep a very large database of information all in one place. And
Hi, Mr. Schrader.
here's our move-in here, if you want to just get a sense of what this looks like. We're moving in.
These are K-State students. They're going to be new residents here for a semester.
You should do that thing that you just did when I first showed it to you.
or stepping in here, they are residents. So treat them as residents, okay? When they come to dinner, they're coming to eat with you. So get to know their story.
And so, like, none of us have made a documentary before. Even I hadn't really made a documentary. I mean, I've done stuff online, but I've never really done a full-on documentary. So we decided to do everything ourselves. We built our own computers, which was a great learning experience. Then we started building our own rigs. We didn't have any money, so we just went to Home Depot and bought a bunch of materials and started. This is like our camera rig.
Sweet.
We built our own lights.
Turn on some lights.
So here's our 3-point lighting system. That's just a light from campus that we found. And then some other lights that are all on PVC poles. And so that becomes our studio. All this set up for, tens of dollars, not thousands of dollars. And then what we do is, again, like, this is all learning in motion, right? So we set up a lighting station. So 2 students are on lighting, 2 students are on camera, 2 students are on interviewing, 2 students are being interviewed. And this is just kind of the process of learning that we use to do this. 2 people on sound, you can see.
Whatever we were saying next.
Another lesson learned.
That was me
And
the
then
first time.
you start to realize that, what are you scared of? Well, watch this.
It's just, it just seems like such a huge project. I feel like we're like at the bottom of like this mountain looking up, and I know we're gonna get there, but right now,
How do you think we're going to get there?
Huh? Why do you think?
Yeah, why do you think we're
Why
gonna
do you think we're gonna get there? You.
Like,
You're gonna drag us
Pull us
up
up
there.
that mountain.
I have very little faith. Oh, sorry. So the reason why I said I have very little faith is because we really, like, the process, one of the things you have to break students out of early on in a project like this is their basic assumption that the teacher is the one who guides things and is going to lift them up or going to decide, one of the worst things is that students expect you to be the decider of what's good and what's bad, right? And it's very hard to get them in the notion of, like, well, we're creating for a larger audience and so on. But I want to show you something even more powerful. This is our orientation here. These are staff here, and this is Taylor. Taylor's one of the students. All the students had what I would call transformational moments at some point during this class, and I wanted to show you Taylor's in particular. And it's something that just really can't happen unless the person is totally involved in the project. And it's something that's so rare in our education. Most students actually put very little of themselves forth in any class. But here you'll see Taylor really putting everything into it, and it has really dramatic outcomes for him. So this is a short clip from Taylor's piece here.
So can I give a hypothetical? If
I like you. I don't know, for some reason I just like you.
Oh, thank you. Feel really good. Thank you.
Have you met Taylor?
I have met
Super
Taylor.
sweet guy, right? But he'd be like
he
the
even
perfect.
smiles while he runs, which I wasn't suspicious of him until that. The treadmill's right across there,
Oh, yeah.
and you can always tell by the speed that whether it's an employee or not. And I thought, who's that? And it's Taylor, and he even smiles while he runs. So there
Even
might be
by
something wrong with
himself.
him.
We discovered our town has taken a direct hit. Words can't describe how we felt. It was despair beyond despair. And I still haven't heard what's happened to my grandparents.
In 15 minutes, everything that I thought I knew, every foundation that I thought I sat on or stood on, was just gone, wiped away.
We were called into the hospital for Grandpa. Our whole family's there. And he's taken off the equipment.
What has been the personal connection for you in relation to the family member you lost in the tornado?
It's fair. It's fair. Yes.
Verda is this woman that has this incredible joie de vivre. She's just incredible. Welcomes me like a grandson in her house and cooks me lunch just because she cares. And she turned out to be an enormous influence on me. So as we're walking down the hallway, Verda just starts telling me her story and opens up about how her husband Sam passed away just 10 months before, and how she's still grieving with that, and how that's difficult, and her feelings of loneliness, her feelings of grief, her feelings of loss. And we start talking together not so much about what we lost, but who the people that we love so much were, and how we've been changed by them, and how we carry that forward. About how her husband loved her so much, and that she shared a life with him, and she's going to continue living. And how my grandpa, how he was just so generous and kind and courageous, and how I want to live like that, and how I want to be like my grandpa. And we just have this beautiful moment. Slowly walking down the hallway, we reach the elevators where she's going to go up and I'm going to leave for the day. And we just have this hug. And she just wraps her arms around my waist and squeezes me tightly. And it was just such a profound moment. It just meant so much to me.
So for me, like these experiences are, it seems like maybe it's far from this idea of living with questions. But to me, the question is like these three elements. One is having a sense of purpose and being on this quest. The second one is having this sense of connection to the people around you, like you're on this quest with other people. But the third and most important thing is that capacity to be vulnerable, to open up to those connections, to open up to those questions. And so I wanted to end with this video here. This is just kind of a scene to me of what wonder looks like and what we should be trying to achieve for our students. And this is a snowstorm that hit Wellington, New Zealand about 1.5 years ago, where it never snows. It never snows in Wellington. And then it did. And all these people were caught out in it, and they go into this state of wonder. I mean, this is like a great study of wonder in itself. And you'll notice that they're not bundling up, they're not running into the stores, they're running out of them. Like this is an embrace of the world, right? And this is what it's like to live in wonder. This is what we should want for our students, for them to embrace the world, embrace one another, to feel a little more connected. I think in this state of wonder, there's this sense that even a simple walk can feel enchanted. And there's really this two sides of wonder, right? There's this sense of elation that comes with wonder, but there's also this other side of wonder. We talk about wondering about, right? Where you turn from elation to investigation, where you want to know more. And it's not just curiosity, which can be satisfied with just a few facts. Wonder just keeps on burning. It keeps taking you farther. And in many ways, you're like a child again. You start to see new connections between things. You see connections that you thought you might never see. And it feels like everything matters. So you start noticing the little things. And I wouldn't want this to like give the sense that wonder is just an experience. I don't think it's just an experience. I think it's truly a capacity. In fact, there's a lot of research now about wonder and curiosity that show that the wonder and curiosity are things that can be nurtured, they can change. So if you have people in your classroom who maybe aren't full of wonder, that's something you can actually change in them. And if you think about the difference in the age of the knowledge machine between somebody with wonder and somebody without it, and you project 20 years out, take two students and they're sitting in your front row. One of them you inspire to wonder, the other one you don't. One of them has the world's greatest knowledge machine all around them to facilitate all kinds of learning that they might do, whereas the other one has the world's largest distraction device ever created. So I really think that's the core of what we need to do in today's world, is just to create this sense of wonder. So I'll end with that. Thanks.
Wow, that was fantastic. So we have about 15, 20 minutes to ask Mike some questions. I think that was a really great way to end. What struck me actually about that video was at one point the little girl is saying, "Mom, Mom," and the mom's on her on her device, right? The little girl is filled with wonder and is looking out, and the mom's on her device. And to me, that's just a striking symbol of what do we do with technology here, and is it keeping our head down, or is it helping us look up and see the wonder that's around us? And so that was just sort of a poignant moment for me.
That's actually a really good thing to start with, because when you look at technology, and this goes back a long time, it's not just like digital technology, but if you look at the technologies of the last 150 years, starting with, say, like the telegraph. This is the first time that information could travel faster than a human being. And then we have a lot of transportation technologies that are similar in that they allow us to travel faster and connect with more people. Basically, what you have are technologies that allow you to connect with more people, to open up your horizons, to see farther and know more. And yet, in many ways, when you look at what we've done in the aggregate with all these technologies, is we've actually found ways to close ourselves off. Mm-hmm. So each of these technologies is definitely a possibility for more wonder, but can actually lead to less. And I think it's because you really have to be comfortable with being vulnerable to learn, to actually open yourself up, and technologies actually allow you to disconnect from others and not be, they actually enable you to not be vulnerable.
So that's actually a great question for you. When did you first see, obviously as children we're built in with a sense of wonder, and it kind of goes away for many of us. And when did you really start to be interested in deep learning?
Well, so there were a few major moments in my life, and one of them was actually near here when I was at USC. So I grew up in Nebraska, and it's a very anti-intellectualist upbringing, so much so that it was very uncool to read, and it was the death of your social life if you were known to actually read anything. So I just decided I would never read anything, and I went all the way through high school without having read anything, and then I went to USC and still didn't read anything. I went through my whole first year and just got the Cliff's Notes and all that kind of stuff. And then my second year at USC, I had this great professor in neuroscience, Bill McClure, and he assigned really bizarre books like Michael Crichton's Jurassic Park and all these types of things. And I was struck by that, and I thought, there's something going on here. So I actually read Jurassic Park. That was the first book I read since I was 9, I think. And I just fell in love with reading and learning just, I don't want to say just for learning's sake, because I think that cheapens it. I now, when I'm in a bookstore or a library, it feels like I'm falling in love. My heart beats faster. I'm so excited, So that was the moment for me. That was the first moment. but there have been others. Yeah.
So a lot of the questions that we're getting on Twitter are really about how do we practically help support this. You know, so a lot of us in the room are we either run the technology or we teach or we do both. And so how do we help create these deep learning environments, and what can our institutions do to support this?
Yeah. Well, a couple of things. I think one is, I think if you're in technology, and I think one of the core assumptions you should have about your job is not that you're laying the pipes, and not that you're, doing those types of things, but that you're connecting people. And one of the things that sort of a foundational piece of the way that we approach technology and anthropology is that technology is really something that provides an environment in which people interact. And the types of technologies you provide are essentially almost like creating you're enabling certain behaviors and disabling other behaviors depending on the types of technologies that you get out there and that you support. So one thing is to be very careful about the types of technologies you choose. But then also I think you should see yourself as a connector of people and bring people together, not just through technology, but face to face, so that they can share ideas about how to use this stuff. And one of the most effective things I've seen around the country is some people call them flash talks, some people call them ignite talks. They're basically like 5-minute talks where you bring lots of people together and it's just boom, boom, boom. People get lots of ideas out because the person speaking only gets 5 minutes. Some people use a Pachachka style, which is like
which we've done here.
Yeah, okay, so some of you are familiar with that. But people really respond well to those, and we just did one at K-State. We did sort of a high-end version of it. We called it Spotlight K-State, and we did 5 to 10-minute talks. We had 15 different faculty, and we had about 400 people show up, which is a huge event for Kansas State. And we made it a high-end event. So we had we darkened the room. We did it in one of our great auditoriums. We had spotlights and lights down and great music. We even had a little, we had one of the music professors started by having his little orchestra play to start things off. So it felt upscale, and people loved it. We just had such a good time. And it's things like that build a culture that facilitates people connecting and sharing and creating these ideas.
So any ideas on how we can convince administrators and other colleagues who are very behavioralistic in nature?
Yeah. Well, those are really big challenges. I mean, the reality is that this is really, really hard. Seymour Papert actually wrote a very depressing article once called "Why School Reform is Impossible." and in that, he pointed out that technology is often seen as the Trojan horse, that those of us who embrace technology, myself included, I think it's pretty clear I embrace technology not for technology's sake, but because it seems like a gateway to sort of nudge in there and change the culture of learning and the way that we approach teaching, right? And so a lot of people see technology as a Trojan horse in the sense that, the story is that, you bring this big cart into the center of the city, and it looks like it's a gift, that it's a Trojan horse, but inside it's full of an army who transforms the whole, takes over, right? But the key is that there's an army inside, and that's what Seymour Papert said, is we keep bringing in this technology, like the Trojan horse theory, but we keep bringing in the actual horse, and we don't bring the army. and that's where you guys come in. I mean, really, it ends up being people and how they use these technologies. So somehow we need that to inspire the army.
So I believe the question, I just lost it. If you were teaching on a deserted island, what 3 instructional tools would you bring with you?
Okay. I will disregard the various impossibilities of that scenario. but let's see, 3 great tools. Oh gosh. It's hard because I'm so technology agnostic. I always start with really try to find a great project that all the students are into. And so maybe I'll just say this, like instead of 3 tools, I'll tell you 3 things that I do. So 3 things I do. One is I try to find a real and relevant project, and I have tests for this. Like it's real if the students, if I don't know the answer or know where this is going to go, like that's a real project or a real problem. And it's relevant if the students will work on it when no grade is attached to it. And those are almost impossible to achieve, but that's like the gold standard, right? That you never get there, but you try really hard to get to that point. Once you have that, then the second thing I try to do is I try to build community. And a lot of the world simulation you saw there was really as much about building community as it is about trying to work through different models and ask big questions. And then the third element is the leveraging technology. But that's where I think it's very important to know about lots and lots of technology so you know what's possible. And so I every day, I have a Twitter feed and a Flipboard feed and all kinds of stuff where I'm reading about new technologies and how people are using them so that I know what's out there. But that's just the third piece. You leverage those in service of the project and the community, and you don't put it in front.
Great, which takes us to the next question. You use a ton of these types of tools. How do you keep track of them? And
Yeah.
How do we help faculty keep track of them? I mean, that's...
Well, I'm a big fan of online communities that are formed around these tools, and they're mostly online communities they're made up of people who have the same passions as you. And really you just need, this is like where people don't get Twitter, right? But you don't get it until you realize that there are all these people who share your passions on there, who are sharing links every day, who are doing a lot of the hard work for you of finding the good material that's out there. It becomes like this great filtering mechanism. So that's how I do it. I mean, I've found through just being passionate about these things, it starts with just Googling things and trying to find, for example, I became interested I started realizing that while the Khan Academy is really amazing in so many ways, it's not everything. And so I started looking for critiques. And when I started looking for critiques, I found this whole blog network of, they actually happen to be people who are interested in physics, which isn't my field, but they pointed me out to all these other, some of it came up today. But that's such a rich network of people who are trying to teach physics in an interesting way. And so I started getting involved in that. And there's a lot of interesting networks like that.
Okay, so I want to give the audience a chance. All right, Linda?
I don't know, or advocating might be better suited to extroverted people than introverted people.
Yeah.
And so I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about, different learning styles.
Right.
And how this might adapt to that.
So that's actually a really important thing to me because I'm actually an introvert myself. And yeah. And so every project I do tries to create spaces for everybody. And it's just kind of a shame in a talk like this, like the people who are active make good pictures and make good videos, right? But it's hard to show somebody just being contemplative. But contemplation is really important to me. And what introverts bring to a group project is extremely important. And so you just have to find a way to make sure that they don't get silenced and that they have the space to do things the way that they need to do them. And really the only way to manage a really big project, like say the one where we're in the retirement community, is like the most important thing in that whole project is that I know my students as well as possible so that I can create the spaces or help create the spaces that allow them to thrive. And we had several introverts in there who became really key people in the whole process. They were the ones who actually changed, like the ship is sort of sailing one direction, and they're the ones who, they barely say anything, but when they do speak, it matters, and the whole ship changes direction because of what they say. So you have to create that space and make sure that they feel empowered enough to speak and have the space to speak.
Fantastic. All right, we're going to take 2 more questions. One.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And those of us who are trying to encourage kids that never raised in the street will actually get support.
Right. Yeah. Thanks.
The second comment
I don't have a comment so much as to say that you just framed like one of those big questions that burns in my soul today, right? Is exactly that, which is, almost like an organic system that encourages all the behaviors that we all want to see flourish, where currently our models of organizing ourselves, and this is in whether it's in an academic department or a corporation or in a classroom, we just have not cracked the code yet on how to unleash the best in people. And I don't really know what else to say about it except that we're on the same page there and asking the same question. I just don't have the answer yet. But
All right, one more question?
Seen for their ideas and not for behavior, which reality TV show and news is all about behavior reporting as opposed to ideas. Can you speak about this kind of secret reward at the end of being seen?
wait, so tell me.
Well, like if your students, a paper typically is only seen by
Oh,
a
yeah.
teacher in a
Yeah.
classroom, and you've got a way for them, no matter what they're doing, they're being seen. It doesn't matter whether it's a lot of people seeing what they're doing. And that.
I think more than anything that what it feels like for 16 weeks in a semester, it feels like vulnerability. It feels like risk. It feels like high stakes, and not so much like a carrot. And it is a carrot in a sense. It drives. It's highly motivating, of course. Students work really hard, but interestingly, like 2 weeks ago. If I were to tell you where we were on our retirement community project, I would tell you it's done. Like we're not going to make it. We're not going to release anything. It's terrible, and then somehow the energy of risk, the energy of having it all on the line, like brought us all together, and we had like this week of flurry of activity that brought it all together. I don't know what else to say, but you're right that there's something I think very important about engaging with the real world and opening up to a larger audience. But I also want to say that that's not for every project and it's not for everything. There's actually a lot of value in creating a private space to develop ideas and for different types of things where you want to take risks that you might not take in public, for example. So.
Well, Mike, we really appreciate you coming here from Kansas and sharing some of your ideas with us today. Everybody join me in thanking Mike Wesch. All right, so for the next 30 minutes or so, you can mill about, talk to each other, talk to our fabulous vendors who are here, have a break. Sessions start at 11 o'clock in the next building, and I think that was a wonderful start to our day to really hopefully get your brain thinking about what can we do to change the world.